I am now let's jump into this discussion. So I would love to, at this point, to welcome Elena Sallitto and Jennifer Sapp. They are the elder law attorney and aging life care manager that is going to kick off our discussion today. And let me prompt Elena to come on. And there we go. We've got both of you. So, well, um, uh, first off, thank you for being our first mixed profession panel that we've done. And Elena, I know that you were on one of on our very first elder law panel, but there may be some folks in the audience that didn't get to know you at that event. So tell us a little bit about your background, what led you to the practice of elder law, about your practice, and then Jennifer, we will get to know you after Elena. So
Okay, thanks, Steve. And thank you for having this. I think this is going to be a really valuable discussion. And you made the mistake of inviting a lawyer to talk about their life history. So I am going to not do that. Just suffice it to say that I've been a lawyer forever, but got into elder law really as a second law career, and got into it very much as a result of having to take care of my parents, my aging parents. So I went down that journey. I am a certified elder law attorney in Maryland. My partner, Catherine Stavely, and I have we've got a practice in Anne Arundel County primarily. Our practice does Medicaid planning, long-term care planning. We do guardianship very much, starting to get into financial exploitation a little too much. And then there's also probate and estate planning. We work very, very closely with geriatric care managers, and I'm sure Jennifer and I have a story to share, which I'm sure we will a little down the road. But that's who I am. That's who we are.
great, great. And Jennifer, tell us a little bit about your background and what led you to. Yeah, Elena, I'm still like you. I still like to call it geriatric care management, but I've forced myself to use aging life care. So
Thank you.
But Jennifer, tell us a little bit about your background. What led you to become an aging life care manager?
Sure, thanks. And thanks for having me. And I agree, it's really great to be able to do a program like this where we talk about how we work together. What's interesting is, as an aging life care specialist, that is exactly what we do over and over again, is work with a lot of different professions and help bring them all together to help support our seniors. So it's a great segue into that process and how we help our clients. So my background, I also was related to some caregiving situations, more long distance, but many, many years ago, with both grandmothers who had Alzheimer's disease. And I went into social work and also did studies in gerontology, did research in Alzheimer's disease very early on, and led me down a path where I eventually found myself wanting to have a more direct service experience. So went into care management, aging life care, as you say. So we, with Seabury, I have been with them. I started with them in 2000. So been around a long time, 20 some years. And this practice has really grown to serve so many people and do so much for the senior population. So,
and I don't want to put you on the spot, but do you know offhand how many care managers are part of the Seaberry Care Management practice these days?
I think we have, I'd say 14 to 18 people total, maybe even 20. We're just growing all the time, you know, and
Yeah,
then
so it's
with different specialties, which is really nice. Some people who have more experience in Alzheimer's or more experience with, you know, the younger adult population that has been absorbed by care management as well. So
Great, great. So, okay, well, this is great. Okay, so now let's jump into what I refer to as round two of these discussions. And I want to remind our audience, we've already received a question for our panel even before the program started, but we love it when these are interactive. So feel free to type in at any point during the discussion any questions, comments, or insights that you'd like to share. And you can do that with the Q&A box or raising your virtual hand. But I'm curious at just you, the two of you, sort of sharing how you work together with elder law and aging life care managers, how you work with other professions. And I think the two of you have worked together on some cases. So obviously we don't want to, share anything that's private or what have you, but it might be interesting to sort of hear how you've worked together over the years to help your clients.
sure.
I'll start. And one of my very first cases in this area was with this very lovely woman who was living in a very unsafe condition, but was absolutely determined that she was not going to leave her house. And that's when I found Jennifer. And I could do the Medicaid application, I could do this spend down and the asset changes for her, but I could not convince her to go from an unsafe situation to actually getting health care. And we brought Jennifer into the picture, and I was just blown away by the magic that she did. And that was when I realized how invaluable the services are and how you really can't be an effective elder law attorney, I don't think, unless you've got a good, solid relationship with someone who's got the clinical side and the human side. So I'm just going to turn it over to Jennifer for the other side of that picture.
Yes.
Well, and I'll tell you, I'm glad you brought that up, Elena, because quite honestly, we could have a full discussion one day on strategies to help family members who might be more appropriate for them to leave the home, and how we work on that. So I'm interested in your response to this one, Jennifer.
Well, that could take hours because
Yeah.
there were many hours that were put in to try to make it happen, and it was definitely a team effort. But I think the place that we start is understanding where our client is, and she was clearly struggling with the loss of independence, and it was the last thing she could hold on to was staying in her home. And so we really needed to find a way to work with her and help her understand that she was actually aiding her own independence by making this transition. And it's true, not everyone needs to transition out of their home, but in this case, it really wasn't an alternative. And I just will back up and say that one of the things that I think we all believe in this profession is that if someone wants to stay in their home, we want to try to honor that. But we also recognize that they might thrive in a different environment and they're just not aware of what that environment might be. So with this lady, we worked with her son and we worked with her, and Elena and I worked very well together, sometimes going out to visit her together, sometimes independently, strategizing, discussing options, bringing in the support that we needed to. She had some friends that were helpful from what I remember. And eventually, after many close calls with some medical crises, didn't quite get to the bottom, but crises start to occur sometimes. And we knew that those were the opportunities to help her make the transition. So we were able to get her to give it a try. And that's how we approached it. Let's give it a try. We assured her that if it doesn't work out, if she's not happy, that we would hear her and hear that out and try to make it better for her. And I think that was something that's really important. And, as an attorney, I know Elena understands all the legal pieces of it and was trying to guide her through that, but also, knew that there's this person who's just scared behind it and trying to protect themselves. So we really, I think, tag teamed really well together with that. And she was in that home for many, many years, until, the end of her life, and did very well. So it's a good success story.
She did a kind of a PS on that one. She actually was given the option to go home on a waiver. And she said, I want to go home. This was several years after she was in the facility. And they said, okay, you can. And then she said, yeah, no, I think I'm going to stay right where I am. And she stayed there for the rest of her life. It was a interesting little story there.
Yeah.
Well, Jennifer, I liked how you framed the problem, because I hear it on a daily basis with the calls that I receive, is that oftentimes the home it's the emotional attachment, even though somebody's there and they may actually feel that it's not as safe and it's not as engaging or purposeful. It's sort of gripping on to that last bit of independence in your personal history. And that's where I've found not only aging life care managers, but it's all the professionals that are in the audience, is that we can serve as guides to help people redefine their purpose and help them understand that, honor that home if it's potentially not as safe, or if it's isolating, and make a transition. So I really like the way you frame that.
Yeah, thank you.
Okay, well, let's see. If you guys don't mind, would you mind if I read you this question that came in before the discussion? Because I really think it addresses some interesting issues that both of you can comment on from a different perspective. This email that I received this morning came from Martha, and she says, I would like to have things already in place for a time when I might suddenly need help with an aid, finances, etc., instead of having to figure it out after a serious medical problem occurs. How can I set up assistance prior to a sudden decline? I recently experienced a total unexpected stroke and seizure. I was very fortunate to have nearly fully recovered in 10 months without needing extensive services other than hospitalization and rehab. But if another serious event happens, I would like to have things in place. Number one, Martha, I wish everybody thought like you. Oftentimes, and I'd love your comments on this, we don't get enough people thinking about the future. More often than not, they're in a crisis situation. But as you can see from Martha's email, she was in a crisis situation. Her eyes are open, and now she's open to sort of planning in advance. So from a elder law and an aging life care perspective and together, what kind of guidance would you give somebody like Martha?
An elder law attorney will sit down with the client and make sure that they have their documentation in place. That would be number one. And as soon as, and everybody needs to have it done, but if you haven't, and let's say there's been a diagnosis, some kind of diagnosis where long-term care is in your future, that would be the time to act, to sit down with the lawyer and make sure you have those ducks in a row. And the two most important documents would be your financial power of attorney. And that's where you designate the person who's going to make financial decisions on your behalf when you can't do it any longer. And you need to have that document done really by an elder law attorney, because we like to put in little tweaks in the document that allow for long-term care planning by the surrogate, by the agent. The documents in and of themselves generally don't give the agent enough information. And the other one that you have to have, I think, is a healthcare advance directive, where you have one agent that's going to be responsible for healthcare decisions in the event you cannot make them for yourself. And what I always tell my clients is make sure you have one decision maker, and you have successors, but don't make it more than just the one decision maker. Otherwise, you're just inviting a lot of trouble. And I will then sit down and I will go through with my clients long-term care options, how it looks, and how it's very much of a money-driven issue. So, the types of care that you can get very much depends on the amount of money that you have available, the resources you have available. And I always then suggest that they sit down with the aging life care manager. I usually pull out my little book, my source book, or my services for seniors, and I circle my people and I say, here, call these people. You need to talk to them to find out what your short-term and long-term needs are likely to be, because I don't have a crystal ball. I am not a clinician. I can't tell you what your needs are going to be. I just know you're going to need them.
Right.
And that's when I would turn it over to someone like Jennifer.
Right. Well, and I'll jump in here and say, and we overlap in that way too, that if we were to start working with a client, we always inquire about whether or not they have their documentation in place. And that if they don't, we direct them to where they can get those completed. But the other side of that question with trying to plan ahead, it is difficult on some level to plan for everything, but we have to take into consideration, do you have a particular condition so that you're going to progress in that condition? And we understand as clinicians what that may look like as it progresses so that we can help you with planning. So that's a big piece of it. But there are unfortunately those unexpected incidents like a sudden stroke or something like that, that it can change your path. So it's difficult to prepare for all of that. But if you have the legal documentation in place, that's step one. And then I believe that knowing what you want is really important. And that's where it helps with the advanced directives, is you have an idea of what exactly is going to be most important to you. I want to be near my family, or I want to, I have a home out of state. I need to make plans for that. All the way through, I want my daughter to perhaps live with me and be a caregiver. And so those are things you want to think about. And in preparing for facilities or services, know what kinds of services you might want and perhaps take a look at them. So maybe going to look at some facilities or getting in touch with some agencies. Very good preliminary plan. And then I also sometimes recommend to people to take it a step further. So let's say, and I just did this recently. I have a woman who the family's concerned if there's a crisis, they don't have a caregiver in the home. So I have recommended that perhaps they get a caregiver through a home health agency, even just once a week now, so that they have it in their home and they're using that service as maybe more as a companion or just helping to run errands, for outings, whatever it might be. And then they're already connected to an agency, particularly like this woman, Martha, who wrote in. That would be a really good option there. Then they're already connected. And if their health changes, they're already connected to an agency and it's just a simple phone call. It's not that everyone has to go into crisis mode and say, well, now we have to get a nursing assessment and then we have to go find a caregiver and then we have to make sure we have the right hours. And, all of that's eliminated and you've already covered that. So I think those are some of the good ways to do it. And like I said, take a tour of a facility. If you think, well, at some point I might want to live in a facility or continuing care retirement community and start planning that way. So there's some steps you can take. You can't be 100% ahead of it. So knowing how to direct someone becomes the answer. So
Yeah,
I was a little, but hopefully you understand. It can go so many directions. It's hard to.
But it's being prepared for different scenarios. And I've never heard, I love what you just said, Jennifer, and I've never heard this on all these discussions. The value of all of us, just like calling up a home care provider and having somebody in your home sort of assisting you, even if you're totally healthy. Because what I hear a lot from families is the first time that a stranger has come in their house to do anything is when they're not feeling well, is when the world is chaotic. And now all of a sudden they realize, wow, I should rearrange my furniture. I should do something different because now I have this individual in my house providing me with assistance. And that I think is a really great suggestion for anybody who's aging in place. I mean, it's obviously remodeling your home to make it more accessible is important, but actually giving it a test drive. Great advice there. Let's see. Just to be clear on, because we had a question on what geographic regions the two of you individually serve. Can you share that with the audience?
I'm primarily Anne Arundel County. We do Calvert. We'll go over the bridge as well. Somehow or definitely PG. If the circumstances warrant, we will travel further. But if it really goes further, then I would probably refer to one of my colleagues that are a little closer.
Yeah.
Okay. And then Jennifer, I know Seabury has a pretty large footprint.
They do. Seabury will cover parts of Virginia, and then all of the surrounding counties in Maryland and Washington, D.C., which is where they're based.
Great. And Seabury is unique to the care management profession because it's a nonprofit, correct?
Yes, that's right.
Great. Okay, Joe Sperling has a good question that he brought related to long-term care insurance. I mean, especially for those that are planning ahead, I'm sure both of you, one of the things that you dive into is the client's financial situation and whether or not they have long-term care insurance. But I'm curious at, how does long-term care insurance play a role in both of your services and your planning?
Sure.
I guess so. From my end, I love it when my clients have long-term care insurance, and and quite a few actually do. Through their employer, especially if it's through the federal government or a large company that offers it as a service. And honestly, I look at their financials and I see they've got long-term care insurance, and I just breathe a sigh of relief. It's like a nursing home is most likely not in your future. You probably have sufficient assets to age either at home or in a nice assisted living facility. There is something that's kind of nice about long-term care insurance, and that Maryland has what's called a partnership program. And if the long-term care policy has magic words in it and says we are a partnership policy, then when it comes time, if it comes time to actually do, let's say, a Medicaid spend down, and there's a cap on the amount of money that you can keep and still be eligible, if you've got this magic long-term care insurance policy, to the extent you've used those benefits, Maryland will give you a dollar for dollar break on how much money you get to keep. So if you spend $50,000 of long-term care insurance, then instead of the $2,500 that Maryland doesn't want, that you can have no more of to qualify for Medicaid, you can now have $52,500 available, which kind of makes life a little nicer. But the policy has to have those magic words or it doesn't work.
Wow.
But yeah, I love seeing long-term care insurance.
Now, Jennifer, do long-term care insurance policies pay for aging life care? Is that, do you have any clients that have ever used their long-term care to pay for your services?
Right. So I have not encountered many, and I suspect that's going to be changing, just as we are growing as a practice and the value of care management. I do anticipate that it will, but a lot of times what I'm finding, well, I shouldn't say a lot of times because I don't know specifics, but there are several policies where I've noticed that they might offer some kind of care management component that comes with the policy. Or I did have 2 clients who they interviewed for a care manager because it had to meet certain qualifications for their long-term care policy. Someone who was an aging life care specialist was one of them. So, but it's not as common as I would like to see. But I will say, you know, we work with those policies to try to help people access that, and when is the time for implementing the aging life care, or excuse me, the long-term care policy. And a lot of times I find I'm spending time clarifying for my clients and researching with the policy to make sure that we meet the requirements and don't miss an opportunity too. A lot of people are afraid to tap into it, thinking that they're not ready, or they wait too long and they could have had help all that time, and didn't. So we help on a lot of different pieces with that.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Yeah, and you know, you touch on something. One of the common themes that we see discussed is communication with your family on what policies you have, where your money is, all of these things that I know you guys are doing the forensic on when you meet with your clients to sort of to get all this in order. I've talked to so many people that, you know, their dad passed away and then they discover he had a long-term care insurance policy, you know, so it's communication is key.
Right.
Let's see. Galera has a question. This always comes up on every single discussion that we have where we have providers, and it's on fees. Okay. And it says, do you combine your fees, or are there separate fees for the lawyer and then for the aging life care manager? But maybe you guys could talk just in general about how it works in your organization's
Sure.
payment.
Yeah, and I want to also follow up too with when we're talking about long-term care. This kind of goes to both of these issues. One of the things that elder law attorneys use frequently, especially when they're doing Medicaid spend downs, if you will, are special needs trusts, particularly where you have a single person and you can't do the marriage, the marital protections. We put excess resources into what's called a special needs trust. That money then is available for the Medicaid, for the nursing home resident, and can be used, and we've done this, to employ an aging life care specialist who comes in on a periodic basis and makes sure that care is being given in an appropriate way. It's worked beautifully. So, and also in terms of fees, yeah, we separate our fees from the aging life care managers. I'm learning, Steve. I'm still old school. I'm getting there. But there are vehicles that can be used, like the special needs trust, that will take care of their fees as well. So it works out very, very well.
That's
But
really
yes,
good as a care manager, you know, that's good to know for us too, Elena. So I didn't know that. But that's great. And that's a really good suggestion, because there's so many people who are alone, who don't have someone to monitor their care. And then they're unfortunately in a financial position where they can't afford to bring in our services at that point.
even if it's $5,000 that you put into a special needs trust, something as low as that, that money really is there to enhance their quality of life and make sure that there are professionals that are there.
That's great. So it's a special needs trust. And do all elder law attorneys provide assistance with setting that up?
A lot of people, a lot of estate lawyers are going into elder law because I don't know if there are any estate planners out there. The elder law is such a unique niche, and there's so much involved in it that I would really look for specifically an elder law attorney rather than a estates lawyer. And I would look on the NALA website, the National Academy of Elder Law Attorneys. If they're NALA members, then you're pretty comfortable with knowing that they know what they're doing.
Okay, that's really good to know. Sorry, I'm doing a little research here.
And you can search by zip code.
Okay.
And I'm
good.
dropping the NALA website into the into the chat for everybody there. Okay. Well, actually, Jennifer. Oh, well, Jennifer. Yeah. How does your practice work? Is it an hourly billing or is it project basis? How does that work?
Generally, we are hourly. We bill for anything we're doing on behalf of our client, and we do it in usually increments of 15 minutes. So, and it is private, and we don't have any kind of combined service, reduced fee, or anything with another service. And part of that is because we don't want to endorse a particular service. We want our clients to know that we're neutral. We are not aligned with any particular practice, so that they're really getting information that's not influenced in that way.
Great. Jennifer, you said something, and this question from Clarine is very relevant. She says, I'm working with a solo living senior. It's you were talking about solo agers, I think is one of the terms. It's no spouse, no children, living with relatives, who I suspect is showing signs of memory issues and forgetfulness, managing bills and appointments. How do I go about suggesting an assessment of cognitive function if the client does not recognize the need? This is a common problem that many family members and friends are dealing with.
Right.
Any suggestions for Clarine?
So that's a great question. And honestly, that solo or not, it is very hard sometimes for someone to accept the assessment. And what we really try to put out there is that we're here to try to help you be as independent as possible. We're not here to dictate what you must do, but just to help you understand what your options are and what kind of support you would want, and have you be a part of planning for yourself and maintaining your independence. Because we recognize that even if that means going to have home health services or whatever, that is all to help them be as independent as possible. So those seem to be the key words with anyone we work with, that this is an individual who can come in who's not aligned with a service, not going to tell you what to do, but just a professional that understands the options and present those options to you and discuss them and help you identify, ways to be as independent as possible. It kind of just circles around that.
Yeah, and Clarine has a follow-up question that I think is relevant for you, Elena. And she says, does apparent mild cognitive impairment affect a client's ability to create the needed documents for estate planning and what have you?
Not necessarily. The only requirement is that the person understand the nature and the consequences of what the particular action is. Generally, though, if there has been a diagnosis of dementia or there is a concern, I would want a doctor to certify that this individual is capable of appointing a fiduciary or executing a particular document before I felt comfortable. Because you want to make sure that your documents are bulletproof, not that somebody down the road is going to come and challenge anything that you did under that document on behalf of that individual. So it's really for the protection of the agent as well.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And, Jennifer, and well, for both of you, but Jennifer in particular, the scenario that Clarine brings up, I hear this all the time, is where it's a neighbor or a loved one is sort of, my mom has to leave her home. Like the family says, this is what I want mom to do. And they come to an aging life care manager and they write you the check and say, here's your hourly rate and everything. But can you explain who you're serving there? Like,
Sure.
I mean, a lot of times I think the family members think that if they cut you the check, that now you're going to do what they say. But
Exactly.
how do you view that client relationship?
So our client is the one that needs the assistance. And we will develop our plan of care around that. And we do not have any particular party directing us to make it go this way or that way, as much as we're trying to determine what's best for that client. And we're clear about that. I mean, I've had clients call and say, well, I'm power of attorney, so this is what I want. And we always come back to, we're managing and helping with the whole system. And certainly as a caregiver, there are some support and needs that you'll have that we will try to address, but ultimately we're serving that client, and trying to determine what's best for them, of course, taking into consideration all of the parties involved. So sometimes we'll come in and we have a completely different care plan when it's all said and done. But I think we work really well with the different parties to help them understand those various components. That it's not just the caregiver or the client, but how can we make this whole system work really well together?
Yeah, no, I always like to throw that out there because I think the way aging life care managers manage this and it's important to remember the people we're working with are adults, and if they don't want to go to the doctor and submit a test or anything like that, I mean, they're making adult decisions unless they've been, diagnosed as not capable. So,
and I'll just interject, and I know this has happened with Elena before, that somebody might say, well, I'm power of attorney for finances, I'll just write you a check. And we have to explain, well, you need to work with your client. They're not incapacitated. Yeah. You need to work with all of us through that. And so we are educating all along the way about how to use their services and authority and that sort of thing too.
Okay, great. All right, let's see. Judith has a couple of questions here. First is, would an aging life care specialist assist in finding soft services for a client, like transportation or friendly visiting? Is that something that you assist with?
Yep, absolutely.
And then she also asks, are there aging life care specialists or elder law attorneys that specialize in clients with fixed income, such as only having Social Security? And Judith, if you don't mind, drop into chat or to Q&A geographically where you might be based, whether this is for you or a loved one. I'm going to just throw into chat, there's a program in Northern Virginia called ElderLink, which is a quasi-government nonprofit that provides aging life care on a subsidized basis. But okay, Judith is in the DC metro area, and she is a clinical social worker serving only Medicare beneficiaries. Okay, so I'll drop in ElderLink there. That might be helpful for you, but I'm curious how you all can advise people who might not necessarily have that much income in utilizing your services.
I usually direct people to our local Department of Aging. I can't speak for the others, but Anne Arundel County is pretty darn good at what they do. And, it just kind of income only is, that's little, it's hard to answer because I would at least sit down with somebody to figure out what their needs were and what the total resources are, because just because they're low income doesn't necessarily mean there doesn't need to be some kind of planning. Most lawyers I know, we're pretty sensitive to someone who is of limited means. So I think it's worth a phone call to an elder law attorney at least.
Absolutely.
And I think one theme on these discussions, when this question comes up, is that, like Elena said, is that oftentimes these providers can optimize the services that they're delivering to you so that you might not necessarily be paying as much. So Jennifer might be giving you guidance as opposed to actually going out and doing the legwork herself, which, you know, she has to account for her hours for.
That's right.
And same with Elena. So I did drop the link into for aging, area agency on aging, nationwide, and then legal counsel for aging, or legal counsel for the elderly, I think is another one that's out there as well. Okay, let's see. Okay, so somebody asked, so does the senior or elderly or disabled have to and need to set up this special needs trust as part of their estate planning, or does the special needs or disability have to already be identified? I hope you can understand that one, Elena.
Yeah, I mean, there's no special needs trust without a beneficiary. What we typically do in our documents is, you know, if there's no one that we know of that has a disability, but we're, you know, doing some kind of will or revocable living trust, we'll say, you know, if there is anybody who's a beneficiary under this particular document ends up with a disability, it's up to the trustee or the personal representative to give this money to a special needs trust created on behalf of that person, you know, pursuant to Maryland, you know, General Health, the Discretionary Trust Act. So it's kind of like a yes and no. You know, if you've got somebody with a disability, then you do the clear planning with regard to that individual. Otherwise, you just kind of set up a contingency in the event somebody might have a disability when they come into this money. Make sure somebody's available to set up a trust is kind of how we work that.
That's right.
Great. And let's see here. Okay, we are, all right. Oh, now this, there's some really good chatter going on in chat here. And okay, again, we always know language and talking about aging is always one of these wacky little things. And Bob says, isn't reinforcing independent a setup for false reality? Encouraging self-sufficiency and collaborative care as a team would be more realistic. Reinforcing independence results in resistance and ambivalence. And Peggy says, when seniors dig in their heels and refuse in-home care and refuse to go to assisted living, they are still independent, and they only want assistance when it goes full catastrophic. Or at what point do you make the decision to let them fail? Man, there's some good chat there. I know that I'm reading it, and I know, you know, I remember, Jennifer, when you brought up the term independent, because I've had this comment so many times when I give presentations, I've started sort of shifting my language to living a purposeful life, you know, because you might not necessarily be, and everybody defines independent as it says as something different, you know.
Well, so I'd like to comment on that because I completely understand what they're saying. And I think that the key is that we are not saying independent. We're saying independent as possible. And that's how I frame it with all of my clients is we want you to be as independent as possible. And so, you know, understanding that their contribution is, you know, helping to identify what services they feel they could work with, maybe identifying, okay, I would consider a facility, but maybe this type of facility. That way they're participating in their own plan and being independent. And someone right after that comment mentioned that there's some other levels of independence. So being in a facility, it's still more independent for that client. They've participated in it and made some decisions about it, and we're giving them the support they need to remain as independent as possible. That we don't paint a false picture of you're going to be, you know, independent under the dictionary's definition. We're talking independent as possible, and that's always our goal.
Yeah,
That's
no. Well, great discussion going on there in chat, guys. Keep it up. This is one of the cool things about these conversations is that you can share your thoughts and opinions with everybody in the audience and our speakers. And no, I love it. Oh, this is a good one from Clarine. What are your experiences in calling adult protective services when one feels that a person cannot manage their daily affairs? Some people suggest this when there are no family members to call for help. I'm personally afraid of this. Have you guys had experience with adult protective services, and when and why would you refer to them?
Honestly, I've had spotty experience with adult protective services. Sometimes they've been great and sometimes not so much. But you know, the statute that they're under is pretty restrictive. So they're very limited in when they can actually get involved. When they do, they're pretty thorough in their investigation, and it's culminated in a couple of cases with the county, the county actually filing for guardianship for the vulnerable adults. So it can work very well. It kind of depends on the nature of the circumstances.
Yeah, it really does. And I just wanted to bring up the client we were talking about in the beginning that Elena and I worked with. We did contact Adult Protective Services. And I think we were trying to understand the parameters that we were working within. And so it was in part to get their feedback about the situation and understand what steps we could take. But also we were clued into a lot of information with that call. When I called, I remember that they had received many calls for this person. So that tells you a lot about the client. So Adult Protective Services, I think, can be very helpful. I will say that as an aging life care specialist, we've worked with them in different capacities and understand how to work with them. And I don't think people should be afraid to use them. They have sometimes gotten a bad rap for things that really were out of their control. But there's ways to work hand in hand with them. We at Seabury have had referrals from APS. And, so I think they serve a really good purpose.
Yeah, and actually we're talking with APS to do a discussion like this with them because they seem to have been coming up more and more. And so getting the curtains pulled back and kind of understanding how they work, I think is going to be important. And speaking of pulling back the curtains, person asks, how do the area agencies on aging and the aging services access points and councils on aging groups work to help? This is sometimes so confusing, all the different groups and organizations, but many provide resources for aging planning services and aging managers. We call this the alphabet soup of aging services. And I'm thinking this could be its own discussion as well as, understanding the differences of area agencies on aging, councils on aging, and their various roles and how we can utilize them. But just on the topic of area agencies on aging, maybe the two of you could share sort of how you've utilized them in your careers, or just some scenarios that have really worked well to refer to area agencies.
We occasionally get referrals from them for legal assistance, and I generally refer people to them to get they in Anne Arundel County. They offer a free assessment to see what you're qualified for, what your needs are. So if you do have some kind of long-term care needs and you have limited income, they're going to be able to hook you into the programs that are available. The SHIP people, by all means, those are the folks that sit down with the Medicare. That's your go-to. Our area of aging does a lot of work with caregivers. They do an annual conference and they do a lot of continuing education kinds of things. So it's that kind of give and take, and it's a wonderful resource that we look to a lot.
Absolutely. Yeah.
And
with them all the time, all the
Yeah,
time.
me too. It's a great source to point people to when you've
Right.
tried a lot of different solutions, and they're aware of a lot of the more affordable services and subsidies. So that's really, really good.
Mhm.
Let's see, we're getting close to wrapping up here, and let me make this our one last question here. It's from Kelly, who says, how can a single adult plan for aging without any obvious family members or friends available to designate as decision makers? I think we touched on this earlier in the conversation, but I think this is a great one for closing on, because for all of us out there, from an aging life care and an elder law perspective, what are some of the tips that you would suggest that we could put in place to um, to help us if we're a solo ager, or even if we do have loved ones and caregivers?
I've done this a couple times, and what I try to do is put together a support team for the person, and I will reach out to their financial advisors if there are. I will bring in someone like an age and life care person, so we've got somebody on board to do the clinical piece. We need someone who's going to be the designated agent under financial power of attorney. And we put the team together as early as possible to work with the principal. And we've had, annual meetings to talk about how things are going. And it's worked out very, very well, where the adult is very comfortable with the team. If they don't like the team, people leave, they come in, we fire them, we hire them. And it works out very well. You have to have the resources to be able to do that. I mean, I hate to say it, money is such a driving force in this whole area. So the more resources you have, the easier it is to put together a team, because you need to have the money to do it. But even notwithstanding that, if you've got a trusted lawyer, a trusted accountant is another perfect person. Somebody that you can reach out to that is going to be able to put together the decision-making team that you need when you need it. That's where you go, because you really don't want to have to be alone, and you just need to find the right people to make that happen for you.
Right. And sometimes as an aging life care specialist, we will help them identify who those
Mhm.
people may be. And we have several people who have perhaps designated an attorney or an accountant to act as their power of attorney, and be their decision maker.
Great. Well, this has been another fantastic discussion, and I really like having the different professions. This may be something that we begin to play around with a little bit more, in addition to the panel of a specific profession. And I really want to thank, especially, it looks like Bob and Peggy and others in chat for the great conversation that's going on there. And I like, Peggy, I like the theme of addressing, when do you let somebody fail? Like, when do we let our clients sort of fail because they're resisting decisions or what have you? I think those of us who are parents understand in raising our kids that this is a technique. And when we're talking about our loved ones and our parents and older adults, I mean, I think that we all reach a breaking point in these processes. So that could be great. So
Can I comment on that, Steve, real
yeah.
quickly? I know we have to wrap up, but something I have said to several clients along the way is we do everything we can to try to point them in the direction of the best care and give them the options and those sort of things. And unfortunately, there are situations where I will explain to a family member who's just hitting their head against the wall because they're doing everything they can and their loved one is not coming along. And that happens, they're just resisting. And I say, well, now what you're doing is you're waiting for the crises. And that's not a scary thing. You're prepared. If that crisis comes along, we know what we have to do. But so it's still they've done everything they can. And so we just have to wait sometimes. We never would direct them to the crises, of course, but we're trying to prevent that. But sometimes you just you cannot force what is the saying? You can only lead a horse to water, right?
Yeah, exactly.
It's that sort of thing. So, but then the caregiver is prepared. Okay, we understand now. We've done everything we can, and that's good for them to know, because they're feeling guilty that they haven't been able to solve this, for just like we do, as you mentioned, with our own children. And so in theory, that's where that, not that we've let them fail, but it just was inevitable.
Yeah.
So
Great.
anyway.
All right. Well, thanks again to everybody. I hope to see everybody on tomorrow to chat with some daily money managers, and on Friday to talk with to learn about this new product that is in trials to minimize Alzheimer's and dementia. And Elena and Jennifer, thanks again. Elena, especially, you kicked off these new formats for us 2 times now. So I'll come up with something for you for a third.
Okay. Thank you, Steve. It's a pleasure.
Thank you so much.